My name is Mark. I'm 28 now, but this happened when I was 23, trying to pay off student loans by taking any shift I could get. This meant I was the permanent overnight cashier at a 24-hour highway gas station. It was one of those big, aggressively bright corporate places set back from a long, dark stretch of a 95. It was an island of fluorescent light in a sea of total darkness. Most nights were incredibly boring. Between 2 and 5 a.m., my only company was the hum of the freezers and the occasional trucker coming in for a coffee, already half asleep and barely acknowledging my existence. This particular night in November was cold and wet. A nasty, misty rain had been falling for hours, which meant traffic was even deader than usual. I hadn't seen a single car for almost 2 hours. I was in the back office, supposedly checking inventory, but mostly just scrolling through my phone. Around 3:15 a.m., the sensor at the front door chimed. I was almost grateful for the distraction. I walked out to the counter, but there was no one there. I figured the wind must have blown something in front of the sensor. I was about to turn back when I saw it. A dark, older model sedan, maybe a late 90s Crown Victoria, parked at the very edge of the lot. It wasn't at a pump. It wasn't near the front door. It was parked in the darkest corner, right by the air compressor, facing the store. The engine was off, but the dim, yellow parking lights were on, glowing weakly in the mist. I watched it for a solid 5 minutes. My annoyance was growing. People used our lot to sleep or to make shady deals. I hated it. It always meant paperwork, but they weren't doing anything, just sitting. The rain was picking up, and the car was just a dark shape in the downpour. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the driver's side door opened. A man got out. He was tall and wearing a thick, dark green work coat with a hood pulled up, even though the store's awning would have protected him from the rain. He didn't walk toward the store. He just stood by his car door, half in shadow, and stared. Not at me, not at the store, but at the ice freezer by the side of the building. He just stood there for at least a full minute, perfectly still. I was getting genuinely freaked out now. I put my hand on the phone under the counter, ready to call the non-emergency line. Then, he finally moved. He walked toward the store, but his pace was all wrong. It was a slow, deliberate, almost casual stroll. The automatic doors hissed open, and the bell chimed again. He stepped inside, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. He smelled like damp earth, and something coppery like old pennies. He pulled his hood down, but it didn't help. His hair was matted and wet, and his face was pale and gaunt. But it was his eyes. They were wide, unblinking, and fixed on something over my shoulder. He didn't look at me. Not once. He grabbed a plastic shopping basket and began to walk the aisles. It was the slowest shopping I have ever witnessed. He would walk an entire aisle, stop, look at nothing in particular, then move to the next. Then he started picking things up. His choices were completely nonsensical. A can of cold spaghetti, a single-serve box of Fruit Loops, a pink car air freshener, a pack of AAA batteries, a bag of beef jerky. He would pick each item up, hold it for a few seconds, and then drop it into the basket with a loud clack. The only sound in the entire store was the scuff-scuff of his heavy work boots on the tile and the clack of another random item. This went on for 15 minutes. I was stuck behind the counter, pretending to wipe it down, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Finally, he made his way to the counter. He slowly, one by one, placed the items in front of me. The spaghetti, the cereal, the batteries, the jerky, a bottle of windshield washer fluid. Will that be all for you tonight? I stammered, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. He just stared at the register, completely still. I waited. Sir. He lifted his head, very slowly, and looked at me. For the first time, he made direct eye contact, and he smiled. It was the most horrifying smile I have ever seen. It wasn't a smile of humor or kindness. It was a wide, stretched, painful-looking grin that showed all of his teeth, which were stained and uneven. His eyes were still wide and unblinking like a doll's. The smile was just a mask. He leaned in, the smell of wet earth and copper washing over me. He whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "You're all alone out here, aren't you? My blood turned to ice. I couldn't speak. My hand, which was shaking, was frozen just inches above the silent alarm button. "It must get lonely," he continued, his smile never fading. "The doors lock automatically, don't they? But they don't lock from the inside." He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact. He'd been watching the store. "What time does your replacement get here? 6? 7? Before I could even form a thought, a loud, obnoxious ring came from his coat pocket. A classic, old-school ringtone. The smile vanished. It didn't fade. It just snapped off his face, replaced by a look of sudden, intense irritation. He looked down, fumbling in his pocket. "Damn it," he hissed, not to me, just to the air. "Now." He pulled his hand out, looked at his phone, and then, with a look of pure rage, he shoved his hand back in his pocket. He didn't answer the call. He just turned, abandoning all the items on the counter, and walked, almost ran, out of the store. The doors hissed shut behind him. I stood there, hyperventilating, for a full 30 seconds before I lunged for the phone and dialed 911. As I was on the line with the dispatcher, watching through the window, his car's headlights flashed on. He peeled out of the parking lot, tires screaming on the wet pavement, and sped off into the darkness. The police showed up, took my report, and searched the area, but he was long gone. My manager, Dale, came in the next morning to review the security footage with me. He was an ex-Marine who I'd never seen rattled by anything. We watched the tape. We saw him come in. We saw him in the aisles. And then we zoomed in on the counter. When he reached into his pocket for his phone, the side of his heavy coat fell open. Tucked into his belt, clear as day on the grainy footage, was a large, wooden-handled hunting knife. But that wasn't what made Dale stop the tape. In his other pocket, the one he didn't reach into, we could see the unmistakable silver glint of a roll of duct tape and a thick bundle of heavy-duty zip ties. I never found out who he was or what that phone call was about. But I know one thing. That caller, whoever they were, didn't scare him off. They just rescheduled. I quit that day and never worked a graveyard shift again. When I was 26, I finally saved up enough to get my first solo apartment. It was a big deal for me. The building was one of those charming, old brick 3 flats in a decent neighborhood. I took the ground floor unit, 1B, because it had its own little patio out back. The floors were creaky and the plumbing groaned, but it was mine. For the first few weeks, it was bliss. I bought a new rug. I cooked what I wanted. I enjoyed the silence. The building was quiet. My neighbor in 1A was an elderly woman I rarely saw, and the upstairs units, 2B and 3B, were both occupied. I'd never met the tenant in 3B, the apartment directly above mine. The building manager, a grumpy old guy named Mr. Henderson, had just said it's a single guy, very quiet, works nights. Quiet was not the word I would have used. The noises started about a week after I settled in. I was in bed, fast asleep, when I was jolted awake. It was a thud, a single, incredibly heavy, floor-shaking thud from the apartment above me. It sounded like someone had dropped a refrigerator. My heart was pounding. I looked at my clock, 3:15 a.m. I figured he'd dropped something. I tried to go back to sleep, but then a new sound started, a long, drawn-out scraping. It was a high-friction sound, like something impossibly heavy and wet, like a waterlogged mattress or a giant sack of something being dragged inch by inch across the hardwood floor. It went from one side of his apartment, directly over my bedroom, to the other side, over my living room. It lasted for 10 agonizing minutes, and then it stopped. I was terrified, but I convinced myself it was just a strange neighbor moving furniture. The next night, I was woken up again. I looked at the clock, 3:15 a.m. Thud, followed by the same, slow scrape. This happened every single night. 3:15 a.m. Thud, scrape, like clockwork. I stopped sleeping. I was exhausted, jumpy, and getting angry. I complained to Mr. Henderson. He sighed, annoyed. He works nights, kid. Probably just, I don't know, has a weird workout routine. I'll have a word. The word did nothing. The noises continued. Then, about a week later, the smell started. I came home from work and was hit by it the second I opened my door. It was a powerful, stinging, chemical smell like industrial-strength bleach, mixed with something metallic and rotten. It was so strong it made my eyes water. It was seeping down from above, strongest in my bathroom, right under his. Now I was truly scared. This wasn't just weird. This was alarming. I banged on Mr. Henderson's door. He was angry this time, but the smell was so bad in the hallway that he couldn't deny it. He marched up to 3B and pounded on the door. "Hey, open up. We need to talk about this. This smell." No answer. We could hear the faint hum of a fan inside, but no one came to the door. This went on for 3 more days. The thud, the scraping, and the overwhelming, eye-watering stench of chemicals and decay. I was sleeping on my friend's couch. On Saturday, I went back to my apartment to grab more clothes, steeling myself against the smell. As I walked down the hall, I saw the door to 3B was open. Just a crack. My stomach turned to ice. Mr. Henderson wasn't around. I knew I shouldn't, but I had to know. I had to have an explanation. I crept up the stairs, my heart in my throat. I pushed the door open. "Hello." The apartment was almost completely empty. The living room had no sofa, no TV, no pictures. Just a single wooden folding chair sitting in the middle of the floor, facing the wall. But the kitchen was a horror scene. The entire floor was covered in thick, black plastic tarps, their edges sealed with strips of gray duct tape that ran halfway up the walls. In the very center of the kitchen sat a massive, white, industrial-sized chest freezer. The kind you'd see in a restaurant or a butcher shop. It was plugged into the wall with a heavy-duty orange extension cord, and it was humming loudly, the source of the fan noise I'd heard. The smell of bleach was so strong in here, I gagged. "Can I help you?" I spun around so fast I almost fell. The tenant from 3B was standing right behind me on the landing. I hadn't heard him come up the stairs. He was a large man, very pale, with dull gray eyes. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, both of which looked damp. He wasn't breathing heavily. He was just looking at me. I'm sorry." I stammered, my hand on my chest. The door was open. I smelled the chemicals. I was worried. He didn't move. He just stared, his expression completely blank. "My floor is being retiled," he said, his voice a flat monotone. "The freezer is for specimens. For my work. I'm a medical researcher." His explanation made no sense. Who puts a giant freezer on a floor they're about to retile? What specimens smelled like that? "You shouldn't be in my apartment," he said. It wasn't a threat, just a statement. He stepped past me, his arm brushing mine. It was ice cold, and shut the door firmly in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I ran back to my unit and locked my own door, my hands shaking. I called my friend and said I was staying for good. I would call Henderson in the morning and break my lease. That night, on my friend's couch, I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling. My phone lit up. 3:14 a.m. I held my breath. 3:15 a.m. My phone, sitting on the coffee table, buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. It was a picture, a grainy, dark photo. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. It was me, sleeping on the couch. "Take it from the window." I screamed. My friend woke up. We called the police. They came. They searched the area. They found no one. The next day, we went to my apartment building with a police escort. We banged on 3B's door. Nothing. Mr. Henderson finally used his master key. The apartment was empty. Completely, sterilely empty. No folding chair. No extension cord. No plastic tarps. No freezer. The only thing left was the air. The faint, lingering smell of bleach and something else. Something sweet and rotten. Mr. Henderson was baffled. He said the man had paid for 3 months in cash. His lease wasn't up. When the police ran the name he'd given, it turned out to be fake. When I was moving my last few boxes out, I dropped one in my bathroom. A bottle of aspirin rolled under the sink vanity. I reached for it, and my fingers brushed against something taped to the underside of the pipe. I pulled it free. It was a small plastic Ziploc bag. Inside, it was a single long strand of my hair and a tooth, a small human molar. It wasn't mine. My girlfriend, Claire, and I are experienced hikers. We're the kind of people who find actual isolation relaxing. 2 winters ago, we planned a 3-day backpacking trip in Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. It was a remote, 10-mile loop trail that was barely used in the summer, let alone in the dead of January. That was the appeal. We drove out on a Friday, the sky a perfect, sharp blue. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but it was clean. We hiked about 5 miles in, the only sound the crunch of our boots on the frozen trail. We hadn't seen another car at the trailhead, no other boot prints. We were completely, totally alone. We set up our 4-season tent in a small clearing overlooking a frozen creek, made dinner on our little stove, and watched the stars. It was perfect. That night, a weather system moved in. We woke up on Saturday morning to a different world. A fog, a thick, wet, oppressive fog had rolled in. It wasn't just fog. It was a cloud we were trapped in. Visibility was maybe 20 feet. We couldn't see the creek. We couldn't see the trees across the clearing. It was silent. The fog muffled all sound, creating a heavy, suffocating blanket of quiet. "We can't hike in this," I said, my voice sounding flat and small. "We'll walk right off the trail." Claire agreed. "We'll have to wait it out. It'll burn off by noon." It didn't burn off. It got thicker. We spent the entire day trapped in our small tent, reading, playing cards, napping. By 4 p.m., as the light began to fail, the world outside the tent just dissolved into a wall of gray-black. The temperature plummeted. A new kind of anxiety set in. The fun was gone. This was now a survival situation. We were zipped deep in our sleeping bags, just trying to stay warm, listening to the oppressive silence. Around 8 p.m., well after dark, Claire, who was lying by the tent door, suddenly grabbed my arm. Her grip was like steel. "Shoo," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Listen." I stopped breathing. Nothing. Just a void. "I don't hear any." "There," she hissed. And then I heard it. A sound, faint and sharp, muffled by the fog. Snap. It was the unmistakable sound of a heavy boot stepping on a dry, frozen twig. My blood ran cold. "It's just a deer," I whispered, trying to reassure both of us. "That was not a deer, Alex," she whispered back, her voice trembling. "That was a boot." We lay there, rigid, for what felt like an hour. Nothing. Maybe it was just the trees settling, I finally said, letting out a breath. And as soon as I spoke, we heard it again. Snap. And this time it was closer. It was followed by a new sound. A low, guttural murmuring. It wasn't English. It was a rhythmic, sibilant whispering like 2 or 3 people talking, but the sound were all wrong. They were just sounds. This was it. This was the moment in the horror movie. We were 5 miles from our car, miles from any other human, in a fog so thick we were blind. I grabbed the flashlight and the heavy camp hatchet we used for firewood. "Who's out there?" I yelled. My voice sounded weak, swallowed instantly by the fog. The murmuring stopped. The silence that fell was worse. It was heavy, absolute, and full of listening. "We have a phone. We're calling the police." Claire yelled, which was a bluff. We had 0 signal. Silence. And then, from directly in front of our tent, just at the edge of where the fog turned into a solid white wall, a shape emerged. It was a person, just standing there. I aimed the high-powered flashlight and clicked it on. The beam shot out, but the fog was so dense it just reflected back, illuminating the figure as a dark, man-shaped silhouette. It was tall, tallerdanme, and it was wide. It wasn't wearing a sleek, modern parka. It looked like it was wearing layers, heavy, matted furs or animal skins. It just stood there, motionless, looking at our tent. "Get away from our camp," I shouted, my voice cracking, holding the hatchet up. "We're armed." The figure didn't move. And then, to our absolute, primal horror, a second figure emerged from the fog and stood next to the first one. And a third. There were 3 of them, standing in a perfect line, just outside the small circle of our camp lantern. They were all wearing the same heavy, primitive-looking skins. They were all impossibly tall, and they were just watching. Claire let out a sound, a high-pitched, terrified sob. The moment she made the sound, the figure on the far right took one slow, deliberate step toward us. That's when I lost it. I wasn't thinking. I just reacted. My car keys were on my carabiner. I grabbed them, fumbled for the fob, and pressed the panic button. Honk, honk, honk. The sound of my car horn, 5 miles away down the mountain, suddenly screamed through the silent forest. It was an absurd, modern, electronic sound in this primal, terrifying scene. The figures froze. All three of them tilted their heads at the exact same time, in perfect unison, like wolves hearing a distant, confusing sound. They listened perfectly still for the entire 30-second duration of the alarm. When it stopped, the silence that fell was 100 times worse than before. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely do it, but I pressed the button again. Honk, honk, honk. This time, as the horn blared, the three figures turned, again in perfect unison. They didn't run. They didn't look back. They just walked side by side, back into the white wall of fog, and dissolved. We did not sleep. We sat there, back to back, with the hatchet and a small camp knife, until the first gray light of dawn. We didn't speak. We just listened. The fog was still there, but it was thinner. As soon as it was light enough to see the trail, we moved. We didn't pack the tent. We didn't make coffee. We grabbed our essential gear, our bags, and we ran. We ran the 5 miles back to the car, constantly looking over our shoulders. We saw nothing. No tracks, no people, nothing. We burst out of the tree line and into the empty gravel parking lot. The car was there. It was fine. See? We're okay, I said, gasping for breath, fumbling to unlock it. We threw our bags in the back and jumped in, locking the doors. I put the key in the ignition, and as the windshield wipers flicked on to clear the heavy frost, Claire screamed. I looked. On the frozen windshield, someone had used their finger to draw 3 tall stick-like figures. And below them, in the ice, they had written one word. Soon, we got to the car, but sitting on the ground, right behind our trunk, was our tent, the one we had abandoned 5 miles up the mountain. It was messily folded and soaking wet, with a single, dark, frozen clump of animal fur resting on top of it.